Okay, very good. Call to order the June 13th meeting of the Finance and Budget Committee. We'll take roll call.
Councilmember Kelly.
Here.
Committee Member McMillan. Here. Councilmember Nguyen.
Here.
Councilmember Newsma.
Here.
Chair Livingston.
Here.
Committee Member Rikus.
Here.
All right. Very good. So I think we have a quorum, and we'll go right into public comment.
Good evening. My name is Jack Mortel, lifelong Evanston resident and homeowner. I'm a retired Evanston Fire Department captain and currently serving my second term as an elected trustee of the Evanston Firefighters Pension Fund. I normally speak to you about the long-term tax savings that result from fully funding the public safety pensions. But I'd first like to touch on the second benefit, when there's a real plan in place to achieve full funding. I've gained some insight on the effect the pension debt has on bond ratings. Basically and obviously, a lot of pension debt that continues to grow is a negative effect on Evanston's bond ratings, which costs the city of Evanston money. Happily, stabilizing and reducing the pension debt with a real sustainable plan in place improves and or stabilizes, maintains the city of Evanston bond ratings, saving the city of Evanston money. In Bob Sinensberg's fine article about public safety pensions from April 15, 1982, attorney Peter Kelly, who teaches a law school course on pension benefits, states that the city's AAA bond rating would be put in jeopardy with the funding problem continuing. I also have a 10-year-old article that squarely puts the blame on Evanston's sizable unfunded pension liability for Fitch downgrading Evanston's bond rating. This bond rating and relationship between bond ratings and pension funds runs whenever you read articles about this. There was a recent one about Mayor Lori Lightfoot in Chicago, that when she did something toward her pension fund, their bond rating went up. It's a positive thing. And when the Fitch mentioned sizable unfunded pension liability, that was the only negative factor mentioned. Currently, looking at what's available online, our bond rating appears to be at the top or near the top when looking at Moody's, S&P, and Fitch. But I have to believe a sustainable, fully funded pension plan could propel us to the top of all three bond ratings, but at a minimum help prevent any drop in those bond ratings, saving the city money. It clearly boils down to the more aggressive assumed rate of return that is used, the quicker full funding and the associated tax savings are achieved. On the other side of the coin, if there's an overly conservative approach to setting the assumed rate of return, the outstanding pension debt continues to grow. We never catch up. In this case, erring on the side of caution is taking the more aggressive approach in determining the assumed rate of return. All that can happen, if that's an error, is the debt will be reduced quicker. Look at the city's website pension page in the most recent 5 years of Foster & Foster's actuarial valuations. The assumed rate of return on investments has been a consistent 6.25. That's been the recommendation, hasn't changed. There's no range of percentage rates in these actuarial valuations, just one. In the last 5 years, I gave you the last 5 years stapled together. What the thing is 6.25. However, in those past 5 years, it appears the council was never informed of our joint actuaries' recommendation of 6.25, but was only presented with 6.5 when determining the city's contribution to public safety funds. Even this 0.25% is a good chunk of money. Between the two funds is about $1.5 million. So multiply that by 5 years, it's a lot of money. And shorting the funds, even that 0.25% combined with only funding at 90%, greatly accelerated the burgeoning public safety pension debt. Talk about penny wise and pound foolish. It's going to take many times the amount of money that was withheld by going to 6.5 to the pensions to pay back the additional public safety pension debt that was created by that action. Please, please, at minimum, let's please follow our actuary's recommendation going forward. And if there's any variance to our actuary's recommendation, please make it more aggressive rather than conservative. It's the best thing for this city. Thank you for your time.
Mr. Schoolmaster?
And this is just a brief public comment. I am an elected official of a unit of government that receives the funds that the city council approves. So I would expect later on, if we have a question, that I would be accorded by the chair, be recognized by the chair, the same as if the mayor came in, or city manager Stowe, or any other elected or appointed official to handle that. I've seen some discussion, and I'm sorry, duties have taken me away, and I've just returned from the National Conference of Public Employee Retirement Systems that I've been active with. Jason Franken has been a speaker at that organization, as have I, and some interesting things nationwide that we've done. I've seen some discussion also on the consolidated police and fire funds, and that's probably a misnomer, because it's the management of the funds. All that will change is the money will be managed by another group. There was some question about what are their return rates or whatnot. Those are red herrings. Those will never match up, and here's why. Number one, let's assume they can do 1% better or 1.5% better than the police fund has been able to do. They're not going to have all our money. We maintain our own operating account. That'll be $15 million for me. How much interest do you get on your checking account? So that money will cancel out the other one. Also, that they are not disclosing the liquidation costs. COGFA estimated in 2012, when the numbers were much lower, that the recovery of the liquidation costs would take 10 or more years. I suspect that may be longer now. The taxpayers are paying for that in the meantime. So whatever their return is not a valid indicator for at least 10 years, and maybe never, just because of the structural build on that. So thank you very much for your consideration.
You're welcome. Any other public comment? Anybody online?
I believe Jason Franken should be online. He had planned to attend this evening, the joint actuary. Just want to make sure he got on in case we have questions. Can you tell if he's on? There's nobody on? Huh.
Okay.
And this is the Zoom link that's posted on the website? Because that's a Zoom link that, he asked me to send him the Zoom link for this evening so he could be present. Jason Franken, the joint actuary. I just want to make sure that this is the Zoom link that's posted, correct? On the city website? Okay, just so it's the same one. And maybe he. Huh.
Okay,
All right.
it's not a separate.
Okay. So the next point is approval of the prior minutes. Hopefully, everybody had a chance to look at those from the May 9th meeting. Any comments on those minutes?
Mr. Chair, I'll move approval of the May 9th minutes.
Okay, let's go ahead and vote.
Councilmember Kelly?
Aye.
Committee Member McMillan?
Aye.
Councilmember Nguyen?
Aye.
Councilmember Nusma?
Aye.
Chair Livingston?
Aye.
And Committee Member Rikus?
Aye.
Okay, so those are approved. There was a request earlier. Maybe we could hit on one thing very, very quickly, which is just to the committee calendar. I don't think there's anything really significant there. There's been a understandable request that there be fewer meetings in August, so we would just like to clarify on page 6 of the packet, the remaining, well, actually recapping for the year, but also the remaining minutes, and if we could, I think that does require a vote, correct? So if everybody's okay, if we could just do that vote.
Did we just
now.
eliminate August? Is that? the
We just
only-
eliminated August. And I think we can still determine in the October-November period, do we want to add a meeting? But I think we can determine that at the time.
Yeah, I mean, I would say December, that we can always cancel it, but I would think
Mm-hmm.
since it's budget season, that we should definitely have one, since we're finance and budget, and we're eliminating August, we should keep one in December, which we can always cancel. That would be my, I think that's,
Okay. So
given the
so-
nature of this committee.
So we could add that now, I guess. So that would be the second,
December 12th.
December 12th. So if that's okay, we modify this to include December 12th.
I'll second that motion.
Okay. And then go ahead and vote on this revised calendar.
Councilmember Kelly?
Aye.
Committeemember McMillan? Councilmember Nguyen? Councilmember Nusma?
Aye.
Chair Livingston?
Aye.
And Committeemember Rikus?
Aye.
Okay.
Can people get on this one?
Yeah, anyone can get on this link. I don't see him as waiting because he's in the other link, so.
Are you monitoring the old link?
No, because I can only be, I can go on my phone and try and monitor the old one, but
Just to see if anyone's waiting.
I'll see if he's, if anyone else is on.
Okay, so I'm looking, okay, I see. So Jason, okay.
Yeah, you can forward that link.
Clicked on the link, but he says, I clicked on the link you sent me and I've been in the waiting room. Okay, so my question is, anybody who's been trying to get on, would they be able to attend our meeting this evening?
I'll check to see if
They're in the old link, so he's gonna check that, but you need to send the new link to him.
Right, no, I'm doing that right now. But I just want to make sure that we're not, that we don't hear later from people like, the link's.
it's just Jason. Okay, he's in now.
Okay. Just as an observer, or was he going to make a comment? Was it just a?
Yeah, so that was one of the reasons, he's here since we're discussing pension this evening,
Yeah, mhm.
and to answer questions, but that's why I asked if we could move this to the top of the agenda. He has limited time to attend, so.
Okay, all right, very good. Okay, so we're going to reorder the agenda a bit in order to allow Jason and make sure we get the focus, and I believe we are under a hard 6 o'clock stop. 6:30 stop, okay, tonight. So we want to talk about the pension first, and so we would reorder this and move the discussion of parking and insurance funds and just the description of the totality of the fund balances to the end, okay? So that means we would go to roughly page 15 of the packet, I believe.
So I'll move discussion of item D2, which is the draft public safety pension policy.
Okay. Yeah. Sure, so we'll start our discussion, and I think Sherry was going to start our discussion here.
Yeah, so David and I worked on the policy, and we just wanted to bring everyone back because I've worked on a number of these, and that, you know, the purpose of the policy is to stand a test of time so that this policy will live on beyond us. So we don't want to be too specific with things that would tie anyone's hand long-term. So what we try, I think the bottom line is this committee, we want to fund this 100%. It's good for Evanston, it's good for our taxpayers, and it's definitely what we want to do. But we want to first set the policy, the structure, then we can determine the rate, and Jack and I are going to work on that. So the goal, what we thought is that we can get this finalized policy. We were thought tonight, but we got a bunch of comments right before the meeting. Then we can get it approved in July. Jack and I would do a bunch of research, talk with the actuaries, and come with our recommendation of the rate. But the key to today is to get this policy done and really the funding mechanism of the policy, because I think we don't want to leave any discretion to that. We want to have this funding recommendation. So, you know, I've looked at what, again, I didn't have time to study. I just looked at what you said, and some of the things I think are a little too specific. I think it's what we're all thinking and it's what we all want, but we want a policy, again, that is the umbrella that can be, and we want to be able to give the future city councils the latitude of rate, of contributions, but we want to give them guidelines. We want to take all that discretion out. So I'm not sure, you know, really we want to get this done tonight if we can. We have a hard stop at 6:30. I think it's going to be very difficult, but I think each side has to work together to get this done. I think the bottom line is we want a policy, and we want a good policy. David and I worked long on this. David spent more time, but we did use a template that was given by our actuaries that had a lot of the legal language and a lot of things that we think are important, and some of that looks like it was taken out. But I think we should go through it. If we can go through it quickly, come to some consensus, get it to legal, get it on posted, get further comments, and then hopefully approve it at next meeting. But we don't want to spend today's meeting debating on the rate, because that would be non-productive. We want to get the policy. Is that fair to everyone?
Yeah, if I could just make a comment.
Sure.
So I think, you know, the way this is usually done is these are amendments, so we would look at what we propose as an amendment. If we're in favor of it or not, we amend it. And I think that when you talk about rate, I mean, obviously, one of the references that we make in here is following the recommendations of the joint actuary. So yeah, I'm glad that you and Mr. Mortel will work on this, and I trust both of you to handle that, so that's fine. But then, so we don't want our objective is a policy, but our objective is a firm policy that fully funds. So it's not just, let's just get a policy. We don't want a vague policy. We don't want a vague policy. We want a clear policy that will indeed reduce this enormous pension liability that rests on the shoulders of the residents. So I just want to be clear about that. It's not just about a policy. So with
No,
that
I
in
didn't
mind.
mean it exactly. I just mean we need to get a policy, but we need to get the right policy, the policy that
Yes,
will
right. So I just want to make that
continue
clear.
on, but also not have something in the policy that we'll never be able to achieve.
Correct.
Because that would be non-productive,
Yep.
so.
So when you're talking about the assumption rate, I guess it's more about how we come to that assumption rate than the particular rate tonight.
Right, and what did we put originally on here, that it would be, that the rate, okay, this is what I was confused on yours. It's the investment rate of return assumption will be reconsidered annually by the city council as or its designated committee, and take input from the relevant police and fire pension boards. So,
Cite the item, Sherry, I'm sorry. Which number?
3A.
3A.
3A? Okay, 1 moment.
Yeah, actuarially determined contribution, numeral 3, and then number 3A.
Right, so,
But I think we want recommendations from the joint actuary, but I think Isn't it the city council that will determine
So
it?
ultimately, they vote on it, but we hire, that's the purpose why both the pension boards and the city together hire someone who's an expert in this field of pension actuary. So I don't know why we would take that and then we would vote on it. We always have to vote on it, no matter what, anyway, but that is the basis of what we're, that's how we are determining it, not based on somebody else who's not an expert actuary.
So if I could bring up a point here, I think in particular if we have Jason on the line, because I did talk to Jason about this. It's up to the plan sponsor. So that would be the city with the input from the pension boards, and ultimately the council to determine what the rate is. And the actuary will review that rate and determine if the actuary thinks it's reasonable. The actuary does not set the rate. And in fact, and if I don't know if we can bring Jason in here, Foster and Foster is highly likely approving reports that use various rates for the exact same assets in the pool. Jason's responsibility is to review that rate for reasonableness, and is it, within the bounds of both, upper and lower bound of what's an acceptable rate. It is not the actuary's job to look at the composition of those assets and make a pinpoint recommendation as to what the rate is.
Well, why don't we ask Jason, what
Why don't we
standard,
ask him if
what are standard practices about setting the rate?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So typically the way we would approach this is that we would look at the assets, look at the investments, look at the capital market assumptions that are provided by various investment experts from across the country, and we would recommend a range of investment return assumptions, typically somewhere between the 40th and 60th percentile. I usually like to prefer a narrower range, maybe the 45th to 55th percentile. And those rates are the ones, within that range are rates that we would feel comfortable using in our actuarial valuations. We did this exercise for both the consolidated police and the consolidated fire invest funds and consolidated funds, and based on that information, each fund adopted a rate that they felt was most appropriate. And so as long as that rate that's adopted by the pension board and the plan sponsor is reasonable, we're not going to have a problem providing results based on that rate. Different places, some places like to be more conservative, others more aggressive, but the rates do need to be within a reasonable range. And as long as that's the case, we can work with, like I said, the pension board and plan sponsor to come up with results based on a rate that everybody can agree upon.
But if we're doing a policy, which we're doing should it be that the actuary will provide a recommendation of rates, but it will be approved by the Finance and Budget Committee or the City Council? Because I don't think you are going to come with us and say, you want this rate. You're going to provide the 40 to 60. So as far as the policy goes, we need the right wording.
Yeah. And for a policy, I would not write in any specific rate. I think that
No,
that's...
I'm talking about the verbiage. How would you write
Yeah,
how the rate
I
would be determined?
I think I think as long as you say that the parties will review, annually, the rate, the expected rate of return. Any verbiage that sort of gets that, to that point, I would be comfortable with. Like I said, I do not like policies, not that this policy does not have this, But where specific assumptions are written into the policy, that's where, to me, it gets a little dicey, because then in order to change any assumption, you have to go through the process of changing the funding
No,
policy.
we agree with that. What
Yeah,
we're
and so the-
debating is, one way says the initial assumed rate, investment rate shall be determined by the joint actuary. And another says the investment rate of return will be reconsidered by the city council and its designated committee, taking input from the relevant police and fire. And personally, I think you're not setting the rate. I think maybe it's that it'll be determined by the city council and its designated committees with recommendations from you.
Well, I just want to,
Yeah.
Sherry, I think there's a third way, what you're actually proposing, which I think is perfect. What if we were to modify this to say, instead, the initial assumed rate of return on pension assets shall be reviewed and recommended by the joint actuary in conjunction with the representative from finance and budget and representatives from the public safety pension boards. So just exactly what you're
I
going to.
think that's what we all wanted to begin with.
Right, but then it's a little bit clearer. It's not just saying like council's going to hear about it and vote on it. It specifies how we get to that, and that's very important. So that would mean next year too, you and whoever it would be from this committee would then meet with a representative or representatives from both pension boards in consultation with Jason Franken or our actuary, and you would then recommend to this body, and we would then recommend to council. Council would vote. I just think it's important to have the specificity.
The steps lined out.
The specificity, otherwise it can.
I mean, I'm fine with that. I just didn't like that the rate's going to be determined by the joint actuary, because I don't think they.
So
If
I'm
I-
proposing to modify it to say.
David, are you okay with that?
Right, so I think we should, I would characterize what we wrote as being essentially that. But I think we can work on what we think is deficient in the language that's currently in 3.3A.
So
If
I
I
just
could
proposed
offer,
it.
if I could offer what I think might get us there, I'm going by the 3.3A in our packet, which reads, "The investment rate of return assumption will be reconsidered annually by the city council or its designated committee and take input from the relevant police and fire pension boards." Let's amend that to say to take input from the actuary and
And the board.
the
too.
boards.
Well,
Yeah.
but
And I think that's more clearly what the intent is, and captures the concern of Councilmember Kelly.
I just think the first sentence, and I agree, instead of saying shall be determined by, it shall be reviewed and recommended by what you just said, Jonathan. So will be reviewed and recommended by representatives from the pension boards, but I would also say representative from the finance and budget committee. That's what we're doing
Well,
here.
we're the designated committee.
Right.
We just put
And the
designated
actuary.
because there may be another name for the committee in the future,
Yeah.
so.
Well, no, then the city council will have to pass an ordinance to change it. So we pass ordinances and recommendations based on what exists. So we
So,
can't.
if I may, I think one of the concerns here, both from representatives from both the pension funds, was we weren't sure that the city council really had input from the actuaries per se. It went directly to the CFO, who then told the committee what those rates were. I think we want to make sure that both the committee and the council have input from the actuary and hear it directly. I think that.
It's fine, so
however
we
you
can
word
just add
that,
that, and I think.
We can
that-
get there.
I think the change I suggested
Yeah, I
would
think your change is
accomplish-
good.
Okay.
So I
So-
think, given the scope of these changes, I had hoped that we had general consensus on the policy, given the comments that we had received back before tonight, but that's not the case. So I don't think we're going to, under any, there's any possibility we're going to leave tonight with a policy that we think is
Well, let's-
relatively.
No, but I
Agreed.
think, David, I think we could
I
spend a
actually don't
half
think we're that far
hour.
off.
I don't
Let's
e-
quickly go through it, so
But let's read this, I think, and I'll type as we read it and send it to you all, so we have the wording. So,
Honestly, David, I don't think we're that far off. I don't. I think it's more, more nuanced.
so does the sentence start? I'll just type it really quick, and that's how we do it at council, and I'll send it to you, the wording, the adjusted wording for this. So the initial assumed, right? rate of it.
Can I suggest we talk about the major issues and determine
Yeah.
how we want to reflect them in a policy, and then over the next week or so, we could
Okay.
again circulate the document and try to appropriately collect comments so we can work towards a document that we think is
I
It's a-
think
there's
that's
a
better
lot
than.
close to
that's-
being
That's more efficient than
complete.
wordsmithing on the dais.
But I just want to, I want to get the general reasons why things are crossed out and
Right.
Yes.
added here,
Right. So
because,
the first one was because we, many
but I
felt
think
that
let's
the-
start at the beginning. There's
Yeah.
a lot of red here.
Well,
so-
you started with this point, which I think is a very important point. You jumped to this one, so I think we should finish
Okay.
this. And I think we're all in agreement then, right? That the rate that would be recommended to council to vote on out of this committee would be determined, the rate that would be recommended, of course, council would have to approve it, would be determined by a representative from this committee in conjunction with our joint actuary and representatives from both pension boards. Are we in agreement with that? You all would
That's
come
not
together.
what, that's not what we just said. It would be based on input from the actuary and the representatives of the pension boards.
And to what Jason
up to
just
the committee.
said, the actuary doesn't set the rate. The actuary opines that it's reasonable
recommends
within.
rates.
He gives
a
a
very
range
blunt-
of rates. He's
In fact,
giving a
is
range.
Jason still
I said in
there? Because
consultation.
I would like to also, relative to rates, because I think they're, in the public comment as well, it was brought up. The debate here of between 6.25% and 6.5%, those are both highly conservative rates relative to the recommendation of 7.125% for the Consolidated Fire Fund and 6.8% for the police. So I think we need to dispel any impression that there's a wildly different view on conservatism between the rates that were discussed. They are both on the conservative side of rates that would be used, but certainly over the next month, we can get a larger sample size of what have other communities in Illinois used for
Well,
their
that's what
rates,
Sherry and
so we
Jack
can
and
better
Tim-
understand.
Yeah, so
And they
I
can do
think, I
that.
don't want to lead down the rabbit hole of the rate. I think right now, let's get the wording right for this one
Yeah,
section.
so just so we're clear, and so I'm not saying anything different, but it's the point that they will come back to us to recommend a rate. I didn't say the actuary will give them the rate, I said you will work together. The actuary, Sherry, or whoever is representing this committee, with representatives from both pension boards, and then come to finance and budget and say, here's what we're recommending as the rate of assumption. I don't see what the issue is with that, and then we would, Mr. Mortel.
I would just like to ask Jason, I can clear this up in a hurry. I'd like to ask Jason a question. I gave you the last 5 years. There's a single rate on there. I said there's no range of
Okay,
rates.
but is this the recommended, because it says the assumption, is this a recommended or this
Yeah,
is an
that's- yeah.
assumed
Well,
rate?
if you look at all, maybe use a little different language. And so I'm confused, because we have a very nice website in Evanston. I was able to look at all these. I never saw a range of recommended rates. I always saw a single rate. And you can hand those around and so now, is that changing? I'm confused now.
That's for Jason.
Jason, is the 6.25% your recommended rate for the last 5 years?
That's not my it's not necessarily a recommendation. It was a rate within a reasonable range that I believe the pension boards recommended at the time, and that there were reasons I think for recommending 6.25. One reason was that the investments were a little different at that time than they are now. They were limited, the pension code limited the amount of equity that could be invested in. And so I believe that the pension funds, and I don't want to speak for them, but they felt that 6.25 was more appropriate given those investment restrictions. And that was the rate that the pension fund recommended. And I believe that there was at least some agreement at the time between the pension boards and the city council or some committee. I don't know all the history, but there may have been some agreement to use that rate. And so we have continued to use that rate in our valuations. However, we have also, over the last several years, provided the same results using a 6.5% assumption, because that has been requested by Hitesh, the CFO, along with the annual valuation that we do at 6.25. So essentially, effectively, we have been providing dual results over the last several years based on 6.25 and 6.5.
And if you had to recommend today with the consolidation of the plans, where would you be? 6.5, 6.25, 6.75?
So
Well,
in
we
our
have him
analysis
here,
for
and I
each of
just,
the so in our analysis for each of the consolidated fund, the 50th percentile rate was somewhere between between 6.75, I think, for the consolidated fire fund, and it was a little closer to 7% for the consolidated police plan. Just, the rates are different just because different investment policies between those two funds. So that was those rates are the 50th percentiles. The range, was really, around 6.5 to just over 7%, where the 45th to 55th percentile ranges that we discussed with those boards.
So I think we've clarified that point, and I agree. We're not trying to set the rate
Right, I
tonight.
just had 'em
We're
here,
trying to set
so.
a process, and we want to be conservative, right? I believe we want to be conservative in fixing our rate. And we'll come up with a subcommittee that takes all this into account in determining what rate is recommended.
so Jonathan, can you read again what you wrote there?
I just added, find it. So I'm a numeral 3, number 3A, and I just added, and take input from the actuary and the relevant police and fire pension boards.
I think that's fine.
Do we have in there, so in the investment rate of return assumption will be considered annually? Because that's.
Correct, and we'll do that every
We
every
should
year.
consider
We
it
should be
annually.
doing every
Right, will
time
be
we do
considered
evaluation.
annually, and then can you continue with the wording from there? Because it's by the Finance and Budget Committee and the City
By
Council.
the city council or its designated committee, and that language, incorporates future unknown changes to our structure. And take input from the actuary and from the relevant police and fire pension boards. I've added
How about
the
based on?
actuary and.
Yeah, I think the only thing that's unclear is the trajectory of these recommendations. So that's where again, specificity is going to be everything, because if we just say take input, next we know, because in the past they'll say, oh, city council approved. We know that we got largely into this big hole because there were rate of assumptions way back before your time that were grossly overestimated. And city council approved it, not because they had a debate, but because it just came before them. So that's where I just want to have some specificity as to how it gets there. And that's where I don't want to say, just take input and council will decide or represent, or a body of. That's where we say that we have these parties, these three parties in conjunction with our actuary.
Maybe it's just
recommend-
the order, Sherry, where you say, first, the actuary comes in, presents the range of reasonable assumptions, then this, then this.
That's fine, but I don't want to say that the actuary is recommending it, because
Right.
they're not.
No,
We
no,
agree.
take that out.
We're with you.
Because they don't. That's a misnomer.
And I think that your working together is a great idea. I think the Finance, and it should say Finance and Budget Committee.
We're all
Should
so
decide.
close here. I feel like
Yeah.
we're heading in the same direction, in the same car, and just fighting over who has the steering wheel. And only one person can steer. Somebody can backseat drive, and the driver can ignore them or not, but only one person can drive, and we're all heading in the same direction here. So
Mr.
let's
Desai?
just take a
Yes,
breath
Desai.
and acknowledge
Real
that.
quick, the few facts, I mean, I heard a couple of times that, we never presented 6.25 to the council. I mean, that's not the right statement. I have presented 6.25, that's why it's out there on the website too. The results at 6.25, 6.5. In fact, just for the knowledge, I mean, 2 years back, one of the council members who is not here, she asked why we are not using the state assumed rate, which was at that time 7%. The projected unit credit meant why we are not, because that would reduce the tax levy. And I said, that's not the thing, the most communities are using it. At the same time, one of the things which comes up every time, and again, we did presentation last year, what the other communities doing? Comparable communities, the neighboring communities, all that, Skokie, Schaumburg, Elk Grove, Algonquin, all those, is around 7%. It's there right on our slide. When I started here in 18, I think 19, I asked Jason, and I have the email from Jason, that at that time even we were using 6.5. And he said 70% of the communities are using around 7%. And there was an article, maybe someone must have read, that Teachers Retirement Fund in Tribune, the big article, they were using 8.25 at that time. And it was a big article that, okay, they are using it. I mean, actually, they agreed that. So ultimately, it is the plan sponsor, in this case, City Council, with the input from the pension boards, and they make the decision. And as Jason said, and it's the broad range. I mean, as Jason mentioned, they are okay. They are the actuary for the consolidated pool investment pool with 6.8 and 7.125%. So I just want to put the facts out there, I've been transparent, giving the council, and I have the Excel sheet I can show you for last 5 years, 6.25%, 6.5%, and the state return, all three numbers. But yes, obviously the council was reluctant. Even in the budget document 5 years back, you would see that the language that the actuary presented recommended 6.5% return. In 18 budget, there's a valuation based on 6.5%, not 6.25 even. After that, it's went to the 6.25. So yeah, we try to, I mean, I'm trying, at least I have, ever since I started, transparent out, bring up that Excel sheet for the summary pensions, say, here are the numbers at 6.25, here are the numbers at 6.5, and this is the state, And generally, council has decided to stay with the 6.5% because they ask me the next question is what the other communities are doing. And I give them the rates used by the other communities. And obviously, because what does that mean if you lower that 6.25 from 6.5? A couple of more millions in tax levy.
Yeah, every 0.25 we estimate is about 1.5 million of
Right.
incremental between the two plans
Well,
combined.
we're not going to do the rate today, but
Right.
what do we
But-
think
but
of the
that's-
wording? You want to,
So,
So- We're not going to wordsmith it now, though, right? I mean, you have the gist of it, Sherry, of
Okay.
what we're looking, but we want the specifics,
yeah, no,
of
we
how
get it,
gets
we get
there.
it, we get
And
it.
the other thing, though, I add, just to dovetail with Mr. Desai's comments, is why don't we say, encouraging council to err on the conservative side, meaning i.e. lower rate, because we only benefit, I'm just saying, we encourage, we don't have to say stick to it. So like, if we're debating between, and we can go with a lower rate, obviously that's going to reduce the deficit more quickly. So I would just say maybe a sentence in there with, encouraging and
Okay,
erring
I
on a
think
more-
we need to go to the sources of contributions.
let me just step back, because I viewed, a lot of this policy was this great base Foster and Foster document, and some of what's in your red line took out the language that they had in there, and maybe Jason could tell us, a little bit more about why they thought some of that language is critical, but
I mean,
I
we could
think
do this
there's
one of
three-
two ways, Dave. We could do what hill we're willing to die on, what we really want
Okay.
in terms, and some of this is nice to have, and some of this is really want to have
yeah.
in terms of changes, and
Right.
So
make-
what are
so
your
I
top
think- I
three?
think
We've
my
already
top three-
revised the,
Top three are, we hear from the actuary.
Okay, we
and
got
then-
that. That's
okay,
number
we've got
two.
that one.
I would say the PPRT, that we
PPRT.
are allocating 100% of the PPRT annually. I've had long discussions with budget director at the state and others.
where are you, what section?
So that would
This is
be.
Roman numeral 4, number 2.
Number two. It
Yeah.
gets, it
Okay.
gets into the specificity of how the contribution's being made, which I agree, this is the most important part of this policy, I believe, is how are we going to fund the required contribution, given the rate, to get us to 100% by 2040?
And let me just
What's the mechanics?
cut this conversation short by saying, I think we all agree with Councilmember Kelly that we want to use the maximum PPRT allowable to us and put that towards our pension obligations. We don't want to use it for anything else. That's what you're saying, right? How do we put that in words? That's wordsmithing. And the words.
Can we use 100% of the PPRT?
Well, I think what Jonathan said sums it up. The maximum amount allowable.
maximum amount, okay.
The maximum amount allowable to,
So my
I think that's
suggestion
fine, what
for number
Jonathan said.
2 was the maximum allowable PPRT allocation. And I think that,
I'm okay with that.
Well, yeah, right now it says the city staff shall ensure that the appropriate amount of PPRT is applied to the pension contribution
So
in
you want
accordance
just
with any state requirements.
Change the word appropriate to the maximum?
what Jonathan just said, I think that's
The maximum
clear.
amount.
That
The
gets-
maximum.
The maximum allowable.
maximum allowable, which maybe for some reason,
So
we can't put 100% of PPRT
Right.
towards pensions, but we're not going to use it for anything else.
Okay, I'm good with that.
So we're in section 4 now. Section 4, because I thought relative to Jason's document, what we added was we want to be 100% by 2040. Everyone agree?
Yes.
Want to be 100% by 2040. We want to have a subgroup.
Wait, where are you, David?
I'm just summarizing where we are in total.
He's zooming
Right.
out.
Oh, I thought we were in section 4.
I'll
Okay,
get right
okay.
there. Number 2 was to have a sort of independent focus group on determining the expected rate of return. And the final one was, which was not in the original policy, what we're talking about now, number 4, of where does the
Where does the money come from?
$27 million come from? Or whatever that number might be, based on each year's actuarial study. And that was what we were trying to get to in number 4, which was a cascading source of funds building up to the required contribution. And that started with, number 1, last year's flat pension property tax levy. Not going to touch it. That's our go-in case. No increase in the property tax levy is the first step, which is about $20 million a year currently. Okay? The second step was what
Wait,
you
but they
just...
had these underlines here, so.
Right.
I'm just going through our policy.
Okay.
Number 2 was what we just talked about, PPRT. Appropriate or maximum amount, I think it's not a big change. Number 3 was available funds in the budget or excess reserves, is number 3, right? We have room in the budget, we have other revenue sources, we have other expenses at the end of the day. Our budget is either balanced or not. If the budget has room in it to do the full contribution, then we're done. If it doesn't, then do we have excess reserves that would allow us to make the contribution? That's where it's sourced from. But then number 4, under our view of this, was that if there are no excess reserves, if there's no room in the budget, if we're in deficit, if we've applied all the PPRT, then that is when we would trigger the property tax increase, as we've defined then last resort.
Okay, so
Right,
here's,
we've
here's my
defined
other
last
hill,
resort.
my other point to hill to die on. What I don't want to have happen is, I think that we need to somehow have in here that these are non-discretionary items, the pension. I think that if you tie raising taxes and asset sales to the pension, that's politicizing it, in my view. So I think that, if we're going to talk about raising property taxes or selling assets, those should be tied to discretionary items like a pet shelter, like a hockey rink, like those types of things. Those are the kind of things I would like to see us educating the public. This is what we're raising taxes for. The pensions are a non-discretionary item. And I don't know how you word that exactly, but that is a nuance in here that I want to see changed.
So I think all money is sort of fungible, right? We have a general fund that at the end of the day is either balanced or it's in deficit, and we have available excess
I
reserves. So it's
disagree.
hard to
I
say
think that
this
there are
dollar goes to
discretionary
here,
and
this dollar goes to
non-discretionary
there.
items.
So
We
could-
have to pay the pensions. We don't have to
Absolutely.
fund a pet
Totally
shelter.
agree. Totally agree. And I think the core of what we were talking about in 4A is when everything is done, when the budget is agreed and people have said, this is what we're spending our money on all sorts of items. They go well beyond pension. If we don't have room to make the full pension contribution, then it's more important to make the pension contribution than it is to not raise property taxes. What wins at the end? At the end, I think for this policy to have any teeth to it, at the end, we default to raise the property taxes and make the pension contribution.
Right, but
That's what was built into here. We can word it differently, but that's the
Right,
core
but we don't raise
of what it
taxes to
says.
do potholes. And I think, again, this has been a mistake that cities have done. We made this mistake back, and even the Blue Ribbon Committee, which did fabulous work, but they ended up having a referendum to raise taxes to pay the pensions, and it failed. You don't want to. Again, this is non-discretionary, right? Am I not mistaken that there was a referendum back in a long time ago to pay the pensions? I believe they did. And so, or maybe Bob Steinberg remembers. But at any rate, I thought there was. We don't want to put this in that position where people become we aren't against, garbage collection. We're not going to we don't want to pit people against that. And there are discretionary funds. We should always, first and foremost, I'm with you. Of course, we will always fund the pensions if it means raising taxes. Yes, of course. But I think we have to have wording in here in the spirit of what Leslie just said, that we will first, this comes after discretionary expenditures have, that's what we raise taxes first and foremost for, are for things that are discretionary, not non-discretionary. And that just needs to be stated in there so that we're making this very clear. This isn't just something we're slapping on top of the budget some year. This is an integral part of our budget annually. And I just, wording that reflects that spirit is so important, because in no way, shape, or form do we want the public to think, oh, they're raising our taxes because they have to pay for the police and fire pensions. That's how frequently they don't get paid.
If I could weigh in here. I understand what you're saying, and I think the fact that we are adopting a policy that very explicitly puts us on a path to 100% funding by 2040, and this is the policy of the council, that makes this essentially kind of non-discretionary. This is our obligation upon ourselves to fund our pensions, and when we're doing our budget, we have all of our non-discretionary spending that, salaries, et cetera, that we have to spend each year, and then the pensions, and then once we have, and pensions are on that first list before we start talking about the animal shelter or the next recreation center or whatever other pet program that some council member in 2032 might come up with. But we've adopted this policy which puts us on 100%, and I think, I think the concern is addressed right there up front in the policy statement, that this is the intention and direction of City Council is to fund at 100%. And when it comes down to where we're going to get that money from, I agree with the chairman that if we don't have a last resort of raising taxes, it lacks the teeth that it needs. Like that is the, that holds our feet to the fire when going through the budget process, like knowing we're going to have to fund pensions at 100%. If in 2037 we don't have enough money to do the extra projects, well, then we don't do them because we have to, or we can't convince the public to, accept a property tax increase. Then so be it. We have to fund the pensions first. This policy does that, and so I'm comfortable with essentially with the wording that's in our packet for number 4, section 4, number 4.
Okay.
I do think if I could move the conversation along to that number 5.
But can we just go back to 4 really quick?
Sure.
So the one point that I like what you guys say, I do think putting something about that it's a non-discretionary budget item in there, because we don't want someone just layman pulling this up and saying, oh, the pension, that's why our taxes are being raised. So there may be a sentence we can add to that.
Would it go in
That
number
would be
4?
great.
Would it go somewhere up in the policy statement?
Or it's in number 4, just make that clear. And a lot of what you just said, just let's be clear that this is non-discretionary. However you word that would be great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry, number 5.
So, yeah, number 5, I think addresses, unanticipated windfalls and allows us the
Yeah.
flexibility if we have, a $10 million permit fee, for example, that is, we're not budgeting, we can use, and in fact, we're encouraged to use at least some of that to pay down our pension obligation.
Yeah, it doesn't say we have to use it, it's just saying that it's a source.
So this would be additional beyond the 100%
It would be
funding.
an incremental
Yes.
contribution, which will then impact future years' contributions because the asset level is high.
Right.
Okay, so this is above and beyond the 100%?
Okay, so if we get some
okay.
windfall revenue, we can use some of that to make a bonus payment over and above the, 100% payment for any given year. And the impact on that will be to reduce our burden for future years. So number 5 really has to stay in there.
It has to stay in, yeah.
And really, the hard work in this policy is developing a budget that has enough room in it that without tax increases, you can fund the pension. That's where the pressure is. But if a future city council, you can end up in a deficit having nothing to do with spending. You're in a recession, and your property and your sales tax drop by $10 million or something on that order. So you can get stuck, or a pandemic, with if there weren't ARPA money or whatever it might be. So that number 3 is the really hard part of this. Build a budget that funds this. But if it doesn't fund it, you still got to pay it.
But I think it's that non-discretionary line is just so important in terms of directing staff to understand you build this automatically. So I just think that's really key, that,
So we can get
we
some-
can't quite, we're going to have to raise. So I think that's a building block of the budget. And so thank you for putting that wording in there.
Sherry, David, you have transparency is 5, and then review of funding is also 5. I think you just want to make review of funding policy number 6.
There's
Oh,
some
yeah,
Just
sorry.
for reference.
Scrivener's errors.
All right. Got it. So I think if we have a path to rework this language around these 3 fundamental points, and then we'll look at what you provided here. We could talk to Jason and say, Jason, okay, do we need the comment about intergenerational equity? I think it's a good comment.
Tell us
and-
what you meant by that.
That
Because
means
right now we are funding the sins of the past. How is it?
Well,
we're
that
not-
is true, right.
Right,
When
so
we're-
how
'cause
are
we're
we
trying
not
to make
gonna
it better
do
for the
that?
future. I agree.
No, I agree.
We wouldn't be in this position if there was a view of intergenerational funding
Exactly.
equity.
So,
And
but,
that's
I
why
mean,
we're trying to
I
not
know,
lay
and
this burden on the future.
It's laudable, but I don't think it's realistic because we are going to
So
be.
we can take some of that out.
Okay.
For sure. We could
right.
take some, but that is the problem we're trying to solve, in that, for whatever reason, we've gotten stuck with this deficit that we need to build our way out of over the next.
So just to be
17
clear,
years.
I would say for now, until 2040, we would take that out. We would add that in 2040 because we're going to be funding from.
So why don't we, I can work with Sherry to try to take your comments, our comments, get this
We'll
into
talk to
something.
Jason, because there may be specific things that need to be in here that we just don't know what we know,
And we did also, in consultation with the boards, also Alex Granchalek, who is an expert in municipal financing, he worked on this. So a lot of this was also his recommendation, and he is on the, I think, is it the fire pension board? And he's, that's what he does, is municipal financing, pensions. And so a lot of this was also with his input, just so.
Well, it's good input, and we'll take it, but your 3 concerns we've addressed. Okay.
And if I could just make one more comment with regards to Section 4, the sources of pension contributions. I think we all understand that we've enumerated them in, kind of declining order of priority. We haven't stated that in the policy, though.
Say that again?
He's saying that, first you go to this, then this, then this.
Right.
Oh,
That's our
okay.
understanding in this discussion.
Oh, we
It's not
should-
clearly stated in the policy, so let's
Okay.
just make sure the policy language reflects that.
Because the sentence here is the source of the required pension contributions shall be any one or more of the following. Sorry.
Yeah. So, yeah, the source shall be the following in,
this-
order of
in this,
priority or
yes, right.
language to that effect.
Can I touch on, just because I know we're going to run out of time shortly, the transparency part? And I know there's a few other areas, but one aspect that I feel is really important in the transparency is providing the public with those charts that, at least 5 years back, 5 years out, so the residents can see where that pension liability has been and where it's headed and how we are making a positive impact on reducing that. I think that's just really important to have those balances from the past to the present and projections going forward based on, again,
Yeah,
projections.
that's a good point. I mean, I think all of our financial reporting can always be clearer and show a multi-year view.
So that's
we'll
in
make sure that's put in here.
Yeah, so we added that in.
Okay, so can I suggest then that Sherry and I try to do this again, meld the two together, recirculate, get Jason's comments, get additional comments from the police and fire pension boards. I think it would be great if we could get to a document we think is something we want to vote on at the next meeting, since we're not meeting in August. We do have clarity, I believe, aside from setting the rate, of what we're doing with this year's budget for the pension contribution. So in some ways, the big benefit of getting this approved and moving on is that there's other stuff we need to work on. But this has been very important to do, but we kind of want to get it approved.
Pretty sure staff has the direction.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we've made it clear.
I do-
Claire and Leslie, one other thing, though, it seems a little repetitive, but you're saying on Section 2, failing to achieve this can lead to funding less than 100%, creating the city must develop a systematic and disciplined annual contribution policy. Isn't that what this is?
Yeah, that's
Okay,
I don't think we need the commentary.
yeah,
our points are,
okay, I just,
it's
because,
nice to have some
okay,
numbers to meet that.
okay.
Though I do want to just one little tiny, it's not a big deal, but in Section 2, General Funding Policy Objectives, the first sentence where it says the plan is to fund the long-term cost of retirement and death and disability benefits. We just have to add death and disability into there. That's,
Because I don't think death and disability in the pension plans? But are they funded by the assets that are in the pension plan?
Oh, yeah, because they would get a payout, right?
Okay, all right. Okay.
Okay. Well, thanks you, everyone. I think this was very productive, very collaborative, and I think we're going to finally have a policy. So,
Okay.
very good.
So our goal would be, hopefully, that everyone's comments are incorporated. If there's any major items we need to discuss, we can discuss them in the next meeting where there's really an open point. And I think it would be wonderful if we could, if the council members think we should do this, vote on it and refer it, or do you just want to take it to the
I
council?
think
Whatever you think the
we take
best
a
way
vote
is.
so that it comes recommended to council from finance and budget.
That would be good.
Fabulous.
All
All
right.
right, D1, we're ready for the discussion of the reserves.
Yeah,
We have 10 minutes.
yeah, okay.
Do you want to do that or fund
Sure.
balances?
So there were some roll forward schedules on what we think our excess reserves are. Maybe in the interest of time, there are two areas where we think we might need to transfer some excess reserve money to fix other fund issues. One being the insurance fund, and the other one being the parking fund, although maybe the parking fund can be just addressed by reducing a recurring interfund transfer. So, Mr. Desai, maybe if you could talk about what's the problem in the insurance fund and why is it $4 million in deficit, and why does the general fund need to cover that?
Okay, so just, yeah, I mean, very little time, but the insurance fund is what we call an internal service fund, so it doesn't have its own revenues. It just gets the money from other funds. One of the things why the insurance fund has been carrying the negative cash, well, it's for some time, it's not last year or year before or some time. Few big settlements every year, more than anticipated, that happens. It's a wide operation in the Evanston, so that's the one thing. And besides that, yeah, we had one case where we paid a lot of big legal fees, and that's kind of one of the things, besides some of the settlements which were like higher.
Was this recent or several years ago?
Several years ago.
Was that the James Park? Okay.
and I think we paid over $5 million, which was a big tranche. And I thought when we started in a good faith, this thing, we thought that we could recover all that money, you know. So that was the purpose at that time, but yes, unfortunately it didn't happen. And then the settlements, yeah, I mean, some of them, you've been there for a long time in the council, you have seen some of the big settlements, you know, and more than anticipated. So that has resulted in this thing. And we were just trying to look at it. It's not that council has to do that or finance. We just wanted to bring to your notice because we were looking at our budget policies, which were approved by the city council, and say, okay, insurance fund should carry these reserves, you know, based on the claims payable amount. And so that's where we thought that, yeah. At one point, I thought, okay, and I think I talked to chair, you know, that, yeah, we can just keep the thing, and we might include this thing again in the 24 budget, just few months down the road in October, you know. The parking fund is the same thing. We looked at the policy, parking fund. Obviously, for the last couple of years, they got some ARPA money, but other than that, I mean, they were hit by the COVID, and they were still not recovered. I mean, if we compare the numbers pre-COVID versus even today, you know. So, yes, they need something, and obviously, we've been talking to Lara, who is our city engineer, you know, what kind of requirements are there. Looks like even in the 22 fund financials, they would end with around 1.2 or 3 million in fund balance. So if they want to spend some money, sometimes the big repairs on structural repairs on parking garages and some of the other things, they might need the money too. So it is kind of a city council adopted, it's discretionary. The insurance fund, particularly carrying negative balance, yes, auditors have to report that. So if you look at the last 4 or 5 years report, you will see in our audit report. And I have to respond as a management that, okay, we'll try better next time and try to give more money to the insurance fund to bring it in the black. So that's where we are for both, regarding to both the funds.
I think, just to clarify your point, to make sure everybody understands, the only way to fix the insurance fund is to do is to budget for it and use up some of the general fund reserves to fix the $4 million deficit.
Absolutely. Why is that? Because in insurance fund, what we account for is, okay, estimated liability claim, workers' comp claims, and health insurance. And then accordingly, we take the money out of the other funds. It's not an external revenue. So it's always balanced, you know. And so you're right, yeah.
And the parking fund could be fixed by just reducing the recurring transfer of, in effect, the profits out of the parking fund into the general fund. Because at the moment, we're sending too much money from the parking fund to the general fund.
And I'm glad you brought it up again. Yes, we transfer too much money. Now, I know it's in the past, yeah, I mean, as the general fund always needed the money, if you look at the last 20 years history. So we tried to take money from here, there, everywhere to kind of, you know, and reduce the tax levy. That ultimately the goal was that. We look at it, parking fund, one piece of the parking is the parking tax, which already goes to the general fund. We have few people who are already charged to the parking fund. And then some other costs like what I do or these things, finance, accounting, legal, yeah. I mean, we could have the reasonable amount, but I think it is a lot more than reasonable right now. And even, yeah, I mean, you don't have to take the decision, but definitely I want to bring it up as a part of the 24 budget.
And so I think with that, the last item on our agenda, unless I've missed something, was to just recap, this came up in the last meeting, all of the available fund balances. And that's on page 30 of 30, in fact. Yeah?
You elect this committee to vote on a recommendation to make these changes? I mean, it's here for discussion.
It's here
so-
for discussion. And I think the guidance you're really looking for is, should you fix this through next year's budget, or do you actually want to do something this year?
I mean, yes, I wanted to just hear the input because we have 5 council members on these. I mean, I can bring it up in 24 budget. So at that time, but you have the details, so you don't have to spend time, you know.
Yeah.
But that's the goal, yeah, to have these items discussed here.
I'll speak for myself, and I'll say I think those are both appropriate recommendations.
Yeah, and that, just so I'm reading this right, is there, so it makes it now a $14 million deficit if we approve this?
Which one of those?
Page 10 of 30.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
just
out
want-
of
how
that,
am I just want to make sure I'm reading
Right.
this right.
I mean, because you see some of those things, unbudgeted items, which we have said, yeah, and if we add that insurance fund and all that, yes.
And then we still have unassigned of 43 million?
Yes.
Okay.
But I would like to talk about parking a little bit. You know, as a council member of the Fourth Ward, I hear frequently from businesses and residents who are not happy having to pay for parking because we have raised the rates recently. If I am interpreting everything correctly here, it would be very difficult for us to reduce parking prices without coming up with some money somewhere else.
Absolutely.
Because we need the money in that parking fund to maintain those facilities.
Absolutely, and that's where I don't want you to, like, even I want to reach out to Lara, that what is the next 5 years parking fund capital, And based on that, yeah, we can present it to the council as a part of the 24 budget, so you can make the right decision.
Right, so the given is that we need sufficient money to maintain our parking facilities, and either that money comes from the people who park there or from everybody else in Evanston on the tax bill.
Yeah, I mean, enterprise fund concept is, yes, whoever the users pay the fees, kind of, So, yes, the parking fund, whoever uses the garage meters, whatnot, yeah.
Right, and given what we are just recommending to do, that cost is being borne by both the users and the taxpayers at large. Okay, thank you.
Okay, and then on page 30 of 30, this was the recap of all the funds, and in fact, you can see at the very bottom, the deficit in the insurance fund of 4 million, the small deficit, but parking fund should actually have some cash in it, of 300,000. But on this point, and I think this was why we wanted to add this to the packet, these are all the funds, these are all the balances, but very few of these are actually discretionary, where we could move the money back to the general fund if we wanted to.
So here's the thing. I mean, if you want, the council says, okay, we want to take 5 million from parking fund or 10 million from water fund. Yes, you can do that. Legally, it's not an issue. But yes, auditors would, or the external agencies would look at it. Okay, these are the enterprise funds. What is the purpose of the transfer? Can you justify all those kind of things? Some of them have legal things like SSA, all the special service areas. You can't do that. TIF funds, you cannot, it has to be used within that geographical area for the TIF funds. Same thing with some of the MFT fund and some of the special revenue funds, yes, because it has a purpose, that, okay, what is this purpose? Internal service fund is, I said, there is no revenue to them. I mean, other funds kind of fund them, so there is no real revenue for that. The only thing what we did is, if you look at here, originally the general fund and human service fund was part of the general fund. And a few years back, I think we realized that human service fund has to compete with the general fund for the tax levy, and that could impact the programs. So we kind of carved out a separate fund. Some of the council members wanted that, and it was a good idea that, okay, human service fund programs should not be affected by the tax levy. So let's give them their money every year. And then the general fund, so that's what happened, yeah. So yeah, you can work with the human service fund, but I don't know whether you want to impact any programs covered in that.
But to be clear, could you access the debt service funds to fund a problem in the general fund?
No.
No, okay,
I
so
mean,
everything under debt service, no.
because we
right.
levy the tax for that.
Right. The library,
Library is a
no.
separate component unit.
Okay. Capital project, maybe some of it
Some
could
of
be.
them, again, it's discretionary, but the situation right now, that we need to transfer money from general fund to the CIP because of the inflation.
Yeah.
Every project comes in the overage,
Okay, but so taking this back to the other discussion about pension funding, if we get to the point of there is no other resource,
You're right.
maybe we could clean up a little bit coming out of the other funds, or no? I think that's something that would be good to understand.
In my
Are
mi-
there some excess dollars within some of these funds that could bridge another year or not? And you don't have to answer that now, but are there any other pockets that are there that would defer even longer getting to the day that a pension property tax would have to be increased?
General fund is the only fund which has no restriction or very few restrictions, if any. But otherwise, yeah, I mean, I can go and explain each of the funds, the purpose, the restrictions, and
We,
whatnot.
so we have reserve funds in many funds, not just the general fund's the largest fund, but we have some like, up to higher, much higher, like up to 25% reserve fund in some funds. So in many of these,
Let me just clarify terminology. You're saying reserve funds, but
I
fund
know,
balance.
I'm getting to surplus, right?
Fund balance is.
Fund
really-
balance, but it's just to make the point that we end with surplus in many of the funds, and we certainly can transfer, as council, we can take action to transfer funds.
If you can, yes, like as I said about
Right.
parking fund.
So we
but
could.
Be sure to talk into the microphone.
Okay, I mean, I talked about the parking fund, I mean, we have done it, but, I mean, obviously, the rating agencies, the external parties, the auditors even ask sometimes, they're okay, can you justify this $1 million transfer from this fund to this one? And, yes, but some of the other funds, half of the funds has a legal restriction, all the home funds, CDBG, CD loan, all SSAs, all TIF funds, MFT fund, yeah, we can, pension funds, obviously not.
How many funds do we keep a reserve? Do we have, how many, it's like 10, right? Or how many total funds do we set aside a specific line item for reserve? Like,
In terms of policy?
yeah, I mean,
None, I think, is the answer. We
What?
don't, reserve isn't a line
No,
item.
we don't
no,
reserve.
no. We keep a 25% reserve.
Fund
from-
balance.
So there are like 10 funds for
Reserve,
which city
like-
council
like we
has
do nine-
adopted the fund balance policy.
Yes.
Like water fund, sewer fund,
Right.
parking, insurance, general fund. So yeah, there are roughly 8 to 10 funds, right, Clayton? For which the council has adopted the fund balance policy.
Right, but let's just be clear about terminology. We have, if you look in our list of funds, and the sub-lists and drill down to nowhere will you see the word reserve.
Well,
right?
we have a
What you're
reserve,
referring to the concept of reserve, which is all the money that's left.
You're right.
well, I'm referring to the 16.6 that we set for the general fund
Right.
as a,
That's the fund balance.
So what are you talking about, Councilor Kelly, is the fund balance policy adopted by the city council?
okay,
like
so also sometimes called a 16.6 reserve.
No, 16.6, the city council adopted the policy, yes, I mean, I don't know whether we are talking the same thing, but city council adopted the policy saying that general fund should carry 16.6% as a fund balance of their operating expenditure. So 2 months of operating expenditure, they should carry as a reserves
Okay.
or fund balance.
So we do that in eight.
7 or 8 other funds,
Okay,
yes.
that's
Water,
what I
sewer.
wanted to,
Okay.
and so we could get that, at some point it'd be nice to know what that total is.
The fund balances shown on the screen here are the fund balance for that fund. So contained within this fund balance that is shown is the amount of the fund balance reserve. So for instance, in the motor fuel tax fund, the policy is 25%. Our current fund balance is 6.3 million. Our fund balance policy says that about 2 million of that 6.3 million is the reserve fund balance.
And
There's nothing beyond what's shown
And
here as the
what's-
fund balance.
But
as
this
the-
chart does not show that percentage.
Does not show.
It would be more helpful if it did.
That MFT fund has a lot more than the 25%, but can you use it for general fund? No.
And
So-
the fund balance is based on the previous year's budget,
Previous year's actual fund balance
actual.
plus or minus operating surplus or deficit of the current year to
I have
get
a-
to the final fund
I
balance.
have one question, if we're cleaning up funds. What's the 5 million for the Crown Center? I mean, isn't that Crown Construction? Aren't we done with that?
Right, we are done, but we are using it for the debt service to reduce the debt. So because that was the purpose when we were getting the donations from these people. They said, okay, in the future, you should use for the debt service after the completion. So that's what we are doing. We are reducing debt service levy by using some money for those bonds issued for the Crown.
So we're past 6:30. I think there's good discussion here. It might be good at some point in the future, and maybe it's even next year. If we had another column, they would just say, what's the excess reserves, to the degree there are any? Because then we could get some visibility that, okay, if we wanted to be a little bit more aggressive to make sure that we don't have, that we can pay everything we need to out of the general fund, maybe there are some dollars here that we could legitimately move.
And-
We don't need to answer that now because we're going to be fine on reserves, But that would be great to know that, hey, there's another 10 million.
One
Or
more
there's 5
column.
million, or 3 million, whatever it is.
One more
Be
column.
great to know.
One more column is whether that the number is 16.6% or some other number.
Right.
And that was on here, yeah. Should it
We
be
would
20?
put that, you're right, we would put 16.6% amount, so we'll a couple of columns, and even I can add one, whether we can use for a kind of, is it unrestricted, yes or no? Because the MFT, it could be excess 4 million reserve, but you cannot touch it.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
So,
I-
but good idea.
We have touched on before, and we don't have enough time to do it tonight, but for a future meeting, I would like to talk about our fund balance policies, and perhaps increasing that from 16.6 to 20%.
Right. That was in the agenda.
I don't
we
want
didn't
to
talk
say
about,
I'm in
but that's
favor of
another
that
point.
until we have the discussion.
Great. Okay, so are we done? Okay.
I would only ask that so that it be an action item, or at least for introduction on the pension, that it be listed not for discussion at our next. Does that
Did we
sound
try to vote
reasonable?
on a policy?
That we're going to try
Right.
to. We can put it for introduction, so it could have 2 readings, and then if we
But
get done,
it's a
we could,
Policy, so it's not even a resolution.
that we would vote to recommend it to council. So it's action. But
And
it
we'll
can
try
be
to
introduction.
appropriately circulate it between people so we can think
And
it's fully
if you have
baked. when we
comments,
walk in.
get them sooner than later, so we could bring the final policy and,
Yeah, why don't you give us a date certain for comments? So,
Or when you'll get it back, but we also,
but we need to get date certain for when we get it back.
All right. Any other? All right, I think we're adjourned. Thank you.